Hello and welcome. Iraq's worst fighting in months seems to be over for now, but tensions between the country's powerful Shia factions are far from over. Last week, the Iraqi government launched its crackdown on the powerful Mahdi army, led by Muqtada al-Sadr, a young religious and political leader. The Mahdi army has around 60,000 fighters, mostly in Baghdad, and the country's second largest city, Basra. The government of Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki said it wanted to end the lawlessness in Basra, disarm the Mahdi army and assert state authority. Well, the outcome of his crackdown certainly didn't go as he planned. More than 400 people were killed and hundreds more injured. As Iraqis swept through the rubble of the intense clashes one day after al-Sadr called for a truce, the government came out looking the weaker party. Muqtada al-Sadr, on the other hand, did not have to disband his militia, and his ceasefire offer has allowed shops and schools to reopen. So who is this young but powerful leader, and what do these inter-Shia tensions mean for Iraq's future? Don't forget, we take your calls on the show, and you can reach us at the numbers at the bottom of your screen. Well, joining me from London to discuss the situation in Iraq is Patrick Coburn, who's covered the Middle East for the past 3 decades. He's the Iraq correspondent for the respected British newspaper, The Independent. His new book is Muqtada al-Sadr and the Fall of Iraq, and it covers the man behind the movement, the Shia revival, and the struggle for power in Iraq. And with me here in Washington, D.C. is Riz Jarrar, an Iraqi blogger and analyst. Mr. Jarrar is currently the Iraq consultant for the American Friends Service Committee. I welcome both of you. Thank you. Patrick Coburn, I would like to start with you in London and ask, it seems that Muqtada al-Sadr is coming out looking stronger because he was able to pull off the ceasefire when Nouri al-Maliki was struggling to achieve something, in fact having to backtrack along the way. So what do you think this has done for Muqtada al-Sadr's standing on the political stage?
Well, it's reasserted his position. It's shown that he's as strong, if not stronger, than he ever was before, that all the threats from Maliki last week that he was going to disarm the militia, which in practice turned out to be the Mahdi army, didn't happen, that within a day or two the Sadrists were able to take over great swathes of southern Iraq, 3/4 of Basra, probably half Baghdad. So it's shown that he's a critical player in the Iraqi political scene.
And to what extent has it sort of asserted how his authority stands, considering he's able to call the ceasefire so quickly and the response seemed to be so quick?
Yes, it shows that he can give orders to the militias and to the militiamen and get those orders obeyed. Somehow it's always brought up, can Muqtada get the Mahdi army to obey him? But all the evidence is not just what happened this morning, but what happened when he called this ceasefire in August and had it renewed it, that he can control the Mahdi army and overall his orders are obeyed.
Riz Jarrar, if I could bring you in, ask you, obviously you know the situation there very, very well personally, and how long do you expect this ceasefire to last?
I don't think for a long time. It's a very temporary ceasefire. The conflict between al-Sadr movement and al-Fadila party on one hand and the Supreme Council and al-Da'wah party on the other hand is a long-term ideological conflict that has a lot to do with their vision and their agenda for the future of the country. Al-Sadr on one hand wants to keep Iraq united with one central government. The Supreme Council and Da'wah want to partition Iraq and have their Shiastan. These things are very, very different and they will not be resolved overnight. In fact, this is what al-Sadrists are looking forward to see, to wait for the next elections and decide who represents the majority of Iraqis in the south and Baghdad. Are Iraqis for a national unity with one central government, or are they for partitioning?
So how do you regard the sort of conspiracy theories that perhaps this surge against the government surge against Iraqi government surge against the Sadrists was something that was sort of plotted outside? For example, with Dick Cheney meeting with the rivals of Muqtada al-Sadr, al-Hakim, and trying to basically clear the way for elections in October.
The connection between Cheney's visit and what happened is obvious, actually. It's not a conspiracy theory. What happened is that after Cheney visited Iraq, the Iraqi central government passed the Provincial law, And this provincial law will allow the next elections to take place. And these are the most critical and important elections in Iraq in the last 5 years. These elections are the ones that will decide whether Iraq will partition, we will have a Shiite South confederation, or whether Iraq will be a united country with one central government. So that what happened is that the powers in the executive branch in Baghdad, which are the Supreme Council and Dawah Party, backed by the US, chose to send 50,000 troops to kill their political rivals instead of putting some advertisements in TV or fixing services to win people's hearts and minds. I think it's a very negative example of how this US-backed democracy in Iraq functions.
Well, I want to get a question in that came by email and put this to Patrick Coburn. It came from Iraq itself, and Tawana says, the Mahdi army are the remnant rogue of former Baathists. They are programmed to kill or be killed. The Mahdi army was also emboldened by the support from the Maliki government to kill and clear Baghdad from Sunnis. They voted for Maliki to be prime minister against their Shiite rival Supreme Islamic Iraqi Council and candidate, that is. In return, they want Maliki to accept their lawlessness. Now, how do you regard that email's assessment of the situation?
Well, you know, it's always in Iraq. Almost all the Shia parties accuse each other of being former Baathists, and there's always some truth in this, but never as much truth as the accusers pretend. And so the accusation against the Mahdi army that they're all former Baathists is sort of something you hear, but the answer is most are not, for fairly obvious reasons. I mean, were they and the government part of the what I see as basically a civil war between Sunni and Shia in Baghdad in 2006 and 2007. Did they take part in that? Were the death squads under the Mahdi army? Of course they were, yeah. I mean, at that stage, one can see that the government, the militias, were to some degree acting in coordination against the Sunni in Baghdad.
And Patrick, watching what's been going on in Basra now, how do you regard the effectiveness of the Iraqi army, how it's basically had the British standing by watching and sort of lending support when needed?
Oh, it was pretty bad. I mean, and I thought it would be bad. I didn't think they'd get anywhere, but it was even worse than I expected. After all, Maliki began the week saying that the Mahdi army militiamen had just 72 hours to hand over their weapons, then they had to pledge not to indulge in violence again, and what Iraqis and everybody else saw on television a few days later was Iraqi army units handing over their weapons to the Mahdi army. So this is a tremendous slap across the face for Maliki. They didn't make any military headway. It reminds me of you remember when the Americans attacked Najaf in 2004. Again, they had great difficulty in making any headway against the militia.
Right, I know you regard what's been going on there as surprisingly bad as well in the south of the country, and I wonder, when you look at what this has done for Nouri al-Maliki's standing, he himself has come out sometimes and said it's not a job he even wants to have. Where does he stand among the Iraqi people now?
I think the 5 parties in the executive branch, al-Maliki and al-Hakim from the Shiite side, the 2 Kurdish parties from the Kurdish side, and al-Hashimi from the Sunni side, these 5 parties represent a small minority of Iraqis, and they even represent a minority of the Iraqi parliament. It's really shocking to see that, because Iraq is a parliamentarian country, a parliamentarian system, where the parliament should elect the executive branch. So when you see that the parties that represent the majority of the parliament are excluded from the executive branch, you see how heavy the US influence is in this selection process is. So I don't think that al-Maliki and al-Hakim and al-Hashimi and the 2 Kurds represent a majority of Iraqis. And the events in Basra were clearly a representation of how the majority of Iraqis, whether they were Sunnis or Shiites, are united against this government that is not popular and not supported by the Iraqis.
An email I'd like to put you, right, that came in from Deborah in Kansas here in the US. Very straightforward. She just says, and this is what President Bush called success. And I wonder, it is pretty direct. A comment on how Americans' reputation is shaping up, and considering, if you consider the American situation, how has America come out looking? The death toll seems to be so high still, even after Saddam Hussein was removed.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't seem like the Bush administration actually is searching for success. They are more searching for excuses to stay in Iraq indefinitely. And this is not just the Bush administration. The major political players in both the ruling parties in DC have different excuses to justify staying in Iraq indefinitely. One of them wants to, keep a strong occupation to kill the bad guys, and the others want to keep a nice occupation to protect Iraqis from each other. But both of them are against giving Iraq back to the Iraqis. So they are not looking for success. When the situation is better, they say we have to stay to keep it better. When it's worse, they say we have to stay to make it better. So,
Raj and Patrick Kerben, I'm going to ask you to stay with us. We've got to take a very short break here. We're right back with more on Iraq's future.